Captain Lee Jae-min stood in the Great Hall of Station Prime and watched as the alien council members took their seats around the massive circular table. The station floated in the empty space between stars and served as the meeting place for all the galaxy's important species. Today felt different from all the other meetings he had attended over the past 30 years since humans joined this galactic community. The Velkari delegates clicked their mandibles together in what humans had learned was their version of whispering. Their spider-like bodies moved with quick, jerky motions as they arranged their notes and data tablets. The Thondul representatives stood silent as always, with their crystal bodies catching the artificial light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. The Morgoth slouched in their specialized chairs that could support their massive bulk, while their tentacles sorted through holographic displays. Dr. Park So-young sat beside Lee at the human delegation table, and her face showed the same calm expression she had worn to every council meeting. She had been Earth's chief diplomat for 20 years and had negotiated more trade agreements and defense pacts than any other human in history. Her reputation among the alien species was one of fairness and intelligence. Today she would need both qualities more than ever. Ambassador Kim Dong-woo leaned forward and checked his notes one final time. As the senior human representative, he had seen the galaxy change from a collection of isolated worlds to a thriving community of different species working together. At least that was what everyone thought was happening until today. The High Arbiter. Thondul raised one crystalline arm, and the great hall fell silent. The being's voice resonated through the chamber with a sound like wind chimes mixed with thunder. The translation devices worn by every delegate converted the crystalline language into words each species could understand. The emergency session had been called to discuss what the other species called the human problem. For 3 decades, humanity had been the backbone of galactic civilization. Human ships patrolled the dangerous outer sectors where pirates and hostile aliens threatened peaceful trade. Human engineers built the space stations and orbital facilities that connected distant worlds. Human scientists shared their technology freely with any species that asked for help. Human traders carried goods between worlds that had never spoken to each other before humans arrived. But now, the other species were worried. The Velkari claimed that humans were building too many warships. The Morgoth complained that human colonies were expanding too quickly into empty star systems. The Thondul expressed concern that human technology was advancing faster than their own. Every species at the table had benefited from human help, but now they wanted to limit that same human presence in the galaxy. Counselor Velthar spoke first, and his translated words carried the arrogance that had made him famous throughout council chambers. He stood on his 8 legs and gestured with 2 of his arms toward the human delegation. His species had been part of the council for over 200 years and considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization. The accusations came one after another like weapons fire. Humans were too aggressive in their exploration of new star systems. Human military forces were growing beyond what any peaceful species should need. Human trade practices were destroying traditional commerce between older alien civilizations. Human technology was being developed in secret without sharing every detail with other council members. Lee listened to each complaint and felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. These were the same species that had begged for human help when their own worlds were threatened. The same aliens who had celebrated when human engineers solved problems their own scientists could not understand. The same council members who had voted to give humanity special status when human ships saved their colonies from disaster. Dr. Park rose to respond, and her voice carried clearly through the translation system. She reminded the council that humanity had never refused a request for aid from any member species. Human ships had defended alien worlds during the Krex invasion when no other species was willing to fight. Human scientists had shared the secrets of faster-than-light communication freely with everyone. Human colonies had been established in dangerous sectors specifically to serve as buffer zones, protecting alien civilizations from external threats. The statistics she presented painted a clear picture. Over the past 30 years, humans had contributed more resources to galactic defense than the next 5 species combined. Human-built infrastructure connected 70% of all inhabited star systems. Human medical research had saved billions of alien lives from diseases their own doctors could not cure. Human agricultural technology had ended famine on dozens of worlds, but the council members were not interested in being reminded of human contributions. They wanted to discuss human limitations. The Morgoth delegate proposed restrictions on human military expansion. The Velkhari suggested quotas for new human colonies. The Thondol recommended oversight committees to monitor human technology development. Ambassador Kim requested permission to speak, and the hall grew quiet. His reputation as a fair negotiator had earned him respect, even among species that distrusted humanity. He stood slowly and looked around the table at faces both familiar and alien. Many of these beings had been his friends for decades. They had worked together to build something beautiful and lasting among the stars. Kim reminded the Council of the early days when humanity first made contact with galactic civilization. Earth had been a single world with limited technology and no friends among the stars. The other species had been generous in welcoming humans into their community. Humanity had tried to repay that generosity by contributing everything they could to the common good. The human colonies that now worried the Council had been established at the request of other species. Human military forces had grown to meet threats that endangered everyone in the galaxy. Human technology advanced quickly because humans shared knowledge freely instead of keeping secrets. Every human achievement had been in service to the galactic community. But Counselor Velthar was not moved by Kim's words. The spider-like alien stood again, and his mandibles clicked with amusement. He had heard enough human excuses and explanations. The time for talk was over, and the time for action had arrived. The Council would vote to impose regulatory protocols on human expansion and development. The vote was swift and decisive. Every species except humanity voted in favor of the new restrictions. Human military forces would be reduced by half within 2 standard years. New human colonies would require council approval before establishment. Human technology would be shared with oversight committees before implementation. Human trade activities would be monitored to ensure fair competition with alien businesses. Lee watched the vote with growing amazement. These species were seriously planning to limit the very activities that had made their own prosperity possible. They wanted to reduce the military forces that protected their worlds. They wanted to slow the colonial expansion that served as their early warning system against external threats. They wanted to control the technology development that had solved their most pressing problems. The final insult came when Velthar addressed the human delegation directly. His translated words carried satisfaction and condescension in equal measure. Humans had been useful contributors to galactic civilization, but they needed to learn their proper place in the established order. They were valuable members of the community, but they were not indispensable to its continued success. The crystalline High Arbiter called for any final comments before the session ended. Lee stood slowly and felt the weight of every alien gaze in the chamber. These beings had just voted to handicap the species that had protected and supported them for 30 years. They believed they could continue to enjoy the benefits of human civilization while limiting human freedom to act. His response was quiet, but every being in the chamber heard it clearly. Very well. Humanity would comply completely with every restriction and regulation the Council had imposed. There would be no protests or appeals or attempts to negotiate better terms. The Council had spoken and humans would obey. Dr. Park and Ambassador Kim showed no surprise at Lee's words. They had discussed this possibility many times during their preparation for the session. If the Council truly believed that humanity was not indispensable, then humanity would give them the opportunity to prove that belief. The human delegation gathered their materials and walked toward the chamber exit. Behind them, the alien council members were already discussing implementation schedules and oversight procedures. None of them seemed to notice the expression on Lee's face or the way the other humans moved with military precision. The council chamber doors closed behind the departing humans, and the great hall filled with the satisfied sounds of alien conversation. Today had been a good day for galactic civilization. The dangerous human expansion had been contained, and proper order had been restored to the galaxy. None of them suspected that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. The message reached Admiral Choi Min-ho while he was inspecting the defense fleet stationed at Kepler Station on the outer rim of human space. The encrypted communication from Earth contained only 3 words, but they were enough to change the course of galactic history. Complete withdrawal authorized. Choi had been expecting this order ever since the council session ended 2 days ago. News traveled fast among the human colonies, and every military commander in human space had been watching for Earth's response to the council's regulatory protocols. The Admiral's staff officers gathered around him as he activated the emergency communication system that connected every human military facility in the galaxy. The largest military withdrawal in galactic history began within hours. Human patrol, fleets that had protected alien trade routes for decades, received orders to return immediately to human space. The massive defense stations that guarded critical jump points between alien star systems went dark as their human crews prepared for evacuation. Border patrol ships that had kept pirate fleets away from peaceful alien colonies turned around and headed home. Engineer Yoon Hai-jin received her recall orders while overseeing the construction of a new orbital shipyard above the Morgeth homeworld. The facility was nearly complete and would have doubled the alien species' shipbuilding capacity within a few months. Instead, she ordered her construction crews to pack up their equipment and abandon the project. The massive structure would remain forever unfinished as a monument to galactic short-sightedness. Similar scenes played out across 200 star systems as human engineers shut down the infrastructure they had spent 3 decades building. The great trade stations that served as meeting points for dozens of alien species began closing their docking bays. The communication relays that carried messages between distant worlds stopped transmitting. The automated defense platforms that protected important alien facilities powered down and went silent. Colonel Shin Yu-jin coordinated the evacuation from her command post on Centauri Base, where humans and aliens had worked together on joint research projects for 20 years. The base housed the galaxy's most advanced laboratories and had produced breakthrough discoveries in medicine, physics, and engineering. Now, human scientists were packing their equipment and destroying any research that might benefit their former alien partners. The colonel watched through her office window as transport ships loaded with human personnel and equipment departed every few minutes. Each ship carried away years of accumulated knowledge and expertise that the alien species had come to depend on. The aliens remaining on the base wandered through empty laboratories and offices with confused expressions as they realized how much of their daily operations had relied on human support. News of the human withdrawal spread through alien space like wildfire. At first, many alien leaders celebrated what they saw as humanity finally accepting its proper place in the galactic order. The arrogant humans had been put in their place and would no longer dominate galactic affairs with their aggressive expansion and military buildup. But the celebration was short-lived. Within days, the first problems began to surface as alien civilizations discovered how deeply they had become dependent on human infrastructure and expertise. The Velkari agricultural worlds that fed billions of their people had been enhanced with human biotechnology that required constant maintenance. Without human scientists to monitor the genetic modifications, their crops began to fail. The Thondul crystal cities that housed their greatest centers of learning were powered by fusion reactors designed and maintained by human engineers. The crystalline beings had never bothered to learn the technical details of the systems that kept their civilization running. Now, those systems were beginning to malfunction without human oversight, and the Thondul had no idea how to fix them. Captain Lim Tae-hyung commanded one of the last human merchant vessels still operating in alien space when the evacuation order arrived. His ship had been carrying vital medical supplies to a Morgeth colony world suffering from a plague outbreak. The aliens were desperate for the human-manufactured medicines that could save millions of lives, but Lim's orders were clear. No exceptions would be made to the complete withdrawal. The captain watched through his ship's viewports as alien vessels tried desperately to escort him to the plague-stricken world. Their communications pleaded with him to complete the delivery mission before returning to human space. Children were dying while the medicine they needed sat in his cargo holds, just a few hours away from the planet that needed it. But Lim had served in the human military for 15 years before becoming a merchant captain. He understood the importance of following orders, even when those orders seemed cruel. The Galactic Council had wanted to see what their civilization looked like without human interference. Earth was giving them exactly what they had asked for. The economic impact of the human withdrawal hit alien civilizations like a tsunami. The efficient cargo networks that had carried goods between alien worlds were operated almost entirely by human shipping companies. Those companies pulled their vessels back to human space and left ancient trade routes deserted. Alien merchants who had relied on human transport found themselves stranded with cargoes they could not deliver. Manufacturing centers throughout alien space began shutting down as they lost access to human-designed equipment and replacement parts. The Morgoth industrial worlds had become dependent on human automation technology that increased their production efficiency by 300%. Without human technicians to maintain the systems, their factories ground to a halt. Financial markets across the galaxy crashed as investors realized the scope of the human withdrawal. Alien currencies that had been stable for decades began fluctuating wildly as trade between worlds collapsed. The interstellar banking system that facilitated commerce throughout galactic civilization had been built on human computer networks that were now being systematically disconnected. Dr. Han So-min was one of the last humans to receive evacuation orders. She had been working on an archaeological dig on the ancient world of Kepler-7, where her team was uncovering artifacts from a civilization that had vanished thousands of years ago. The Joint Human-Alien Research Project had been making remarkable discoveries about the galaxy's prehistoric inhabitants. The evacuation transport arrived at the dig site to find alien archaeologists pleading with the human scientists to stay. The aliens had contributed funding and personnel to the project, but all the critical expertise belonged to the humans. Without human analysis techniques and dating methods, the dig would have to be abandoned just as they were making their most important discoveries. Han watched from the transport's windows as the archaeological site grew smaller behind them. Months of careful excavation would be lost as wind and weather reclaimed the ancient ruins. The aliens left behind lacked the knowledge to preserve the delicate artifacts that told the story of their galaxy's past. Military leaders throughout alien space began receiving disturbing reports from their outer territories. Pirate fleets that had been kept in check by human patrol ships were growing bolder in their attacks on peaceful settlements. The raiders had learned to avoid sectors defended by human forces, but now those forces were gone and entire regions of space lay undefended. The Nexus trade route that connected the galaxy's most important commercial centers became increasingly dangerous as criminal organizations moved in to fill the vacuum left by departing human security forces. Merchant ships that had traveled safely for decades were now being captured and their crews enslaved by pirates who no longer feared retaliation. Colony worlds on the galactic rim sent desperate messages to their homeworld governments requesting military support against increasing hostile attacks. The buffer zones that human settlements had provided were disappearing as human colonists packed up and left for home. Alien civilizations were suddenly exposed to external threats they had forgotten existed during 30 years of human protection. The Galactic Council called emergency session after emergency session as member species reported growing problems throughout their territories. What had seemed like a minor inconvenience was rapidly becoming a crisis that threatened the stability of their entire civilization. They had expected some temporary disruption from the human withdrawal, but nothing like the cascade of failures that were spreading across the galaxy. High Arbiter Thondul found himself facing angry delegations from dozens of species as their representatives demanded immediate action to address the crisis. The crystalline being had been confident that alien civilizations could function perfectly well without excessive human involvement. Now that confidence was being shaken by reports of economic collapse and military vulnerability from every corner of galactic space. Counselor Velthar tried to maintain his arrogant facade, but even he was beginning to worry about the implications of the human withdrawal. His own species' homeworld was experiencing power shortages as human-maintained fusion reactors began failing. The Velkari had never developed their own expertise in advanced power generation, because humans had always been willing to handle those technical challenges. 6 months after the human withdrawal began, Dr. Han So-min stood in what had once been the most advanced research facility in the galaxy and watched alien technicians try desperately to keep basic life support systems functioning. The Joint Archaeological Project on Kepler-7 had been abandoned, but she had returned as an observer to document the collapse of galactic civilization for Earth's historical records. The facility that had once housed breakthrough research in dozens of scientific fields was now a shadow of its former self. Laboratories that had produced miracle cures for alien diseases sat empty because the human researchers who understood the complex equipment had returned home. Computer systems that had processed vast amounts of data about galactic phenomena were slowly failing without human technicians to maintain their quantum processors. Captain Lim Tae-hyung received permission to make one final tour through what had once been the galaxy's busiest trade networks. His merchant vessel was officially conducting a survey mission for Earth, but everyone knew he was really documenting the economic catastrophe that had spread through alien space like a plague. The great trade stations that had served as meeting points for dozens of species were now ghostly structures drifting silent through space. The Nexus trade route that had connected the galaxy's most important commercial centers was littered with the wreckage of ships that had tried to operate without human protection and maintenance. Merchant vessels from a dozen species floated dead in space after their crews discovered they lacked the technical knowledge to repair systems that had always been serviced by human engineers. Lim's ship passed through sectors that had once been busy with interstellar commerce and found only empty space where thriving trade networks used to operate. The efficient cargo systems that humans had built over 3 decades had simply vanished when their creators went home. Alien civilizations were learning the hard way that they had never really understood how their own economy functioned. The first refugee fleets began arriving at the borders of human space as outer rim colonies were overrun by hostile forces that no longer faced organized resistance. Species that had lived peacefully for generations under human protection suddenly found themselves fleeing for their lives as pirates and raiders swept through undefended territories. Captain Park Seo-jin commanded the border patrol ship that intercepted the first Velkari refugee convoy at the edge of human space. The spider-like aliens who had once considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization were now begging for permission to enter human territory as their own worlds burned behind them. The Velkari refugees told stories of nightmare that would have seemed impossible just months before. Their agricultural worlds were dying as the enhanced crops that fed billions of their people failed without human biotechnology support. Their industrial centers were shutting down as manufacturing systems designed by human engineers broke down beyond repair. Their military forces were helpless against pirate fleets, using tactics that human strategists had taught them to counter. But Earth's response to the refugee crisis was coldly bureaucratic. Applications for entry into human space would be processed according to standard immigration procedures that could take years to complete. Emergency humanitarian provisions were available only to species that formally acknowledged their dependence on human assistance and requested protectorate status. Under Earth's authority, Korthak the Wise was among the few alien leaders who had opposed the regulatory protocols from the beginning. The ancient Velkari philosopher had warned his people that they were making a fatal mistake in trying to limit human activities. Now he led a desperate delegation to Earth, carrying an official apology from his species and a plea for forgiveness. The old alien stood before human officials in Earth's capital city and delivered a speech that was broadcast throughout both human and alien space. His species had been wrong to fear human expansion and influence. The Velkari had allowed pride and jealousy to blind them to the reality of their dependence on human civilization. Now they were paying the price for their arrogance as their homeworld slowly became uninhabitable. The atmospheric processors that maintained breathable air on the Velkari homeworld had been installed and maintained by human engineers for over 20 years. The complex systems required constant monitoring and adjustment that no Velkari scientist understood. Without human expertise, the processors were failing, and billions of Velkari had less than 3 months before their air became poisonous. Earth's response to Korthak's plea was polite, but firm. Humanitarian assistance would be provided to prevent unnecessary deaths, but only after the Velkari government formally requested protectorate status and acknowledged human authority over their territory. The galaxy's former leaders would have to become subjects of the species they had tried to control. The Thondul crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were going dark one by one as their power systems failed catastrophically. The crystalline beings had built their civilization around massive fusion reactors that provided unlimited clean energy, but those reactors had been designed and maintained entirely by human engineers. Without human oversight, the complex systems were becoming unstable and threatening to explode. Ambassador Kim Dong-woo received a desperate personal message from High Arbiter Thondul begging for immediate technical assistance to prevent a nuclear disaster that could destroy the Thondul homeworld. The crystalline being who had presided over humanity's humiliation in the Galactic Council was now pleading for help from the species he had tried to regulate and control. Kim's response was delivered through official diplomatic channels and broadcast throughout the galaxy. Earth was willing to provide emergency technical assistance to prevent loss of life, but such assistance would require formal recognition of human authority over Thonduil territory and resources. The proud crystalline civilization would have to surrender their independence to save their own lives. The Morgoth Empire that had once spanned dozens of star systems was fragmenting into warring city-states as their industrial civilization collapsed. The massive beings had built their society around manufacturing and trade, but both sectors had depended entirely on human technology and logistics. Without human support, their economy had imploded within months. Morgoth industrial cities that had produced goods for export throughout the galaxy were now silent ruins as their automated systems failed without human maintenance. The aliens had never learned to repair the sophisticated machinery that had made their prosperity possible. Generations of Morgoth had grown up assuming that human technicians would always be available to handle complex technical problems. The breakdown of Morgoth civilization led to civil wars as different city-states fought over dwindling resources. The species that had once been united under a single government was tearing itself apart as regional leaders competed for access to the few remaining functional factories and power plants. Their requests for human intervention were ignored by Earth's government. Dr. Lee Hyun led a human scientific expedition that toured the ruins of what had once been galactic civilization. Her mission was to document the collapse and identify any alien technologies or knowledge that might be worth preserving before they were lost forever. What she found was a galaxy that had forgotten how to maintain its own infrastructure. Space stations that had served as crucial links in the galactic communication network were drifting powerless through space as their life support systems failed. The aliens who remained aboard were slowly dying as they waited for rescue that would never come. Their own species lacked the technical knowledge to repair the stations or evacuate the survivors safely. Research facilities that had housed the galaxy's greatest scientific minds were being abandoned as alien researchers discovered they could not operate equipment that had always been maintained by human technicians. Decades of accumulated knowledge were being lost as computer systems crashed and data storage devices failed without proper care. The few remaining functional alien governments began receiving reports of social unrest and rebellion as their populations realized the scope of the crisis facing their civilization. Citizens who had lived comfortable lives under the protection of human-maintained infrastructure were now facing shortages of food, power, and basic medical care. Pirate fleets that had been contained by human military forces for decades were now operating freely throughout alien space. The raiders had learned that most alien species were helpless without human protection and were taking advantage of the power vacuum to establish their own territories. Peaceful civilizations that had known nothing but security for generations were suddenly facing conquest by criminal organizations. The galactic communication network that had connected distant worlds for 30 years was slowly failing as relay stations went offline without human maintenance. Alien governments were losing contact with their own colonies as the infrastructure that held their civilization together continued to deteriorate. The galaxy was becoming isolated and fragmented as the systems that had united it fell apart. Captain Lim completed his survey mission and returned to Earth with a detailed report on the collapse of galactic civilization. 1 year after the Great Withdrawal, President Moon Kyung-soo stood at the observation deck of Earth's orbital defense station and watched as the first official alien delegation in 12 months approached the Sol system. The crystalline ship moved slowly through space, as if its occupants were afraid of making any sudden movements that might provoke a hostile response from the human defenses surrounding Earth. The president had once been humanity's greatest advocate for galactic cooperation and had spent decades working to build peaceful relationships with alien civilizations. Now he watched the approaching ship with the cold detachment of someone who had learned painful lessons about the true nature of interstellar politics. The aliens had taught humanity that friendship meant nothing when power was at stake. General Seo Woo-jin stood beside the president and monitored the tactical displays that showed human military forces throughout the solar system. Earth's defenses had grown enormously powerful during the year of isolation as human technology advanced without the burden of supporting alien civilizations. The weapons and shields protecting humanity's homeworld were now decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen before. The approaching delegation was led by High Arbiter Thondul himself, along with representatives from every surviving alien species. Their ships looked ancient and primitive compared to the sleek human vessels that escorted them toward Earth. The technology gap that had once favored the older galactic civilizations had reversed completely during humanity's year of independence. Ambassador Park Min-jung served as the liaison between the human government and the alien delegation. She had been born on an alien world to human parents and had spent her entire life trying to build bridges between different species. Her unique background made her the perfect person to translate not just languages, but the fundamental differences in how humans and aliens viewed their relationship. The delegation brought news that confirmed everything human intelligence services had already discovered through their monitoring of galactic communications. The Velkari homeworld was down to its last few weeks of breathable atmosphere as their environmental systems finally collapsed completely. 3 billion spider-like aliens were facing death by suffocation because they had never learned to maintain the life support technology that humans had installed for them. The Thondol crystal cities were experiencing cascading power failures as their fusion reactors became increasingly unstable without human oversight. The crystalline beings faced a choice between accepting dangerous radiation levels or watching their civilization go dark forever. Several smaller Thondol colonies had already been evacuated as their reactors exploded and contaminated entire worlds. The Morgoth Empire had fractured into dozens of competing city-states that were fighting savage wars over the few remaining functional manufacturing centers. The massive aliens who had once been peaceful traders were now killing each other for access to resources that had once been abundant when human logistics networks kept goods flowing between their worlds. Entire species were facing extinction as their populations dropped below sustainable levels. The complex medical technologies that had allowed low birth rate aliens to maintain stable populations had been developed and maintained by human scientists. Without that expertise, genetic diseases and reproductive problems that had been solved decades ago were returning to devastate alien populations. President Moon received the delegation in Earth's grandest diplomatic facility, but the meeting felt more like a surrender ceremony than a negotiation between equals. The aliens, who had once considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization, now came as supplicants, begging for aid from the species they had tried to control and limit. High Arbiter Thondol spoke first, and the crystalline beings' words were translated into human language with a humility that would have been unthinkable just 1 year earlier. The Galactic Council formally acknowledged that they had made a terrible mistake in imposing regulatory protocols on humanity. They had not understood the true nature of their dependence on human civilization, and now they were paying the ultimate price for their ignorance. The alien delegates offered everything they had left in exchange for human assistance. Their remaining technology would be shared freely with Earth. Their surviving worlds would accept human administration and oversight. Their populations would acknowledge human authority in all matters relating to their survival and future development. But President Moon's response shocked even his own advisors with its coldness. Earth was not interested in ruling over the ruins of alien civilizations or taking responsibility for species that had proven themselves incapable of self-governance. The galaxy had made its choice when it voted to limit human participation, and now everyone would live with the consequences of that decision. General Seo presented the delegation with detailed intelligence reports showing exactly how completely their civilizations had collapsed. Human monitoring stations had recorded every failure and breakdown that had occurred over the past year. The aliens were forced to confront the reality that their entire way of life had been built on a foundation they did not understand and could not maintain. The general's briefing included economic analysis showing that Earth's economy had grown stronger during the year of isolation. Human colonies were expanding rapidly into empty space that had once been claimed by alien civilizations. Human technology was advancing at an unprecedented rate without the burden of supporting less advanced species. Humanity was thriving, while their former partners were dying. Counselor Velthar made a personal plea that was broadcast throughout both human and alien space. The proud, spider-like alien who had once declared that humans were useful but not indispensable, now admitted that his species had been completely wrong about the nature of their relationship with humanity. The Velkari were facing extinction and only immediate human intervention could save them. The counselor's speech included a formal apology, not just from his own species, but from every member of the former Galactic Council. They acknowledged that humanity had never been their equals because humans had always been their superiors in every way that mattered. Human technology was more advanced, human society was more stable, human military forces were more effective, and human leadership was more competent. But President Moon's response was even more devastating than his earlier rejection of their offers. The aliens still did not understand the fundamental nature of their mistake. They thought this was about technology or economics or military power, but it was really about trust and respect. Humanity had offered friendship and partnership, but the aliens had responded with fear and attempts at control. The president's words were carefully chosen to drive home the lesson that needed to be learned. 30 years ago, humans had joined the galactic community as hopeful partners who wanted to build something beautiful together. They had shared their strength and ingenuity freely because they believed in the dream of united civilizations working toward common goals. But the aliens had seen human generosity as weakness and human cooperation as submission. The aliens had taught humanity that the galaxy did not want partners or friends. The galaxy wanted masters and subjects. The regulatory protocols had been an attempt to make humans into subjects of the older alien civilizations. Instead, they had revealed that the aliens were completely dependent on human superiority in every field that mattered for survival. Ambassador Park delivered the most shocking revelation of the entire meeting when she presented evidence that human technology had advanced far beyond anything the aliens had imagined possible. During the year of isolation, human scientists had made breakthrough discoveries that put Earth centuries ahead of the most advanced alien civilizations. The species that had tried to control humanity was now so primitive by comparison that they posed no threat to human interests. The delegation was shown examples of new human technology that seemed like magic compared to their own capabilities. Faster-than-light travel that did not require the complex gate networks that connected alien worlds. Energy weapons that could destroy entire fleets with single shots. Defensive shields that could protect planets from any conceivable attack. Manufacturing systems that could build starships in hours instead of years. Earth's final offer was presented as a take-it-or-leave-it proposition with no room for negotiation. Alien species that formally acknowledged their complete dependence on human civilization and requested protectorate status would be allowed to survive under Earth's protection. Their cultures would be preserved as historical curiosities, but they would never again have any real authority over their own affairs. Species that refused protectorate status would be left to face extinction on their own. Earth would not interfere with their collapse, but neither would Earth provide any assistance to ease their suffering. The galaxy would be allowed to die while humanity watched with the same detachment that scientists showed when observing the extinction of primitive species. High Arbiter Thondol asked for time to consult with the surviving governments of his species before making such a momentous decision. But President Moon's response made it clear that Earth's patience was limited. The offer would remain open for exactly 1 standard month. 18 months after the Great Walkout, Admiral Baek Jun-ho led a small human fleet through the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's greatest civilization. The ships moved silently through space that had been filled with bustling trade networks and military patrols just 2 years earlier. Now there was only debris and the fading signals of automated distress beacons that no one was coming to answer. The formal dissolution of the Galactic Council had been announced 6 months ago when the last functioning alien government finally acknowledged that they no longer had the resources or authority to maintain interstellar cooperation. The great dream of united civilizations working together among the stars had died when its member species chose to limit the activities of the only partner capable of making that dream real. Dr. Lee Hai-jin stood on the observation deck of Admiral Baek's flagship and recorded her observations of the dead worlds they passed. Her mission was to establish preservation zones around the homeworlds of extinct species for future scientific study. Earth wanted to maintain detailed records of how galactic civilization had collapsed so that historians could analyze the sequence of events that had led to such complete destruction. The Velkari homeworld appeared on their sensors as a lifeless ball of rock orbiting a dying star. 3 billion spider-like aliens had suffocated when their atmospheric processors finally failed completely. The species that had once considered Themselves, the natural leaders of galactic civilization had chosen to die with their pride intact rather than accept human protection as subjects instead of equals. Korthak the Wise had been among the last Velkari to die, and his final message to Earth had been broadcast throughout human space as an example of alien stubbornness. The ancient philosopher acknowledged that his species had made a fatal error in opposing human expansion, but he refused to see his people become subjects of any other civilization. Better to die free than live as protected animals in a human zoo. The Thondul crystal cities were dark monuments to crystalline arrogance scattered across a dozen worlds throughout their former territory. The beings who had presided over humanity's humiliation in the Galactic Council had watched their fusion reactors explode one by one rather than accept human technicians operating under Earth's authority. Their civilization had literally gone out in a blaze of nuclear fire. Admiral Bayek ordered his ships to maintain safe distances from the radioactive ruins of Thondul worlds, but their sensors could still detect the massive craters where crystal cities had once stood. The species that had built their society around the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom had chosen ignorance and pride when those qualities conflicted with their survival instinct. Only fragments of the Morgeth Empire remained after 18 months of civil war between competing city-states. The massive aliens had fought savage battles over the few remaining functional manufacturing centers until even those had been destroyed in the crossfire. The species that had once been peaceful traders were now extinct after tearing their own civilization apart with their bare tentacles. Captain Lim Tae-hyung commanded one of the survey vessels documenting the economic collapse that had spread throughout alien space. His ship passed through sectors that had once been the galaxy's busiest commercial centers and found only empty space where thriving trade networks used to connect dozens of worlds. The infrastructure that had taken centuries to build had vanished completely within 2 years. The great space stations that had served as meeting points for interstellar commerce were now derelict hulks drifting through space like monuments to galactic short-sightedness. Some still had alien survivors aboard, but they were slowly dying as life support systems failed without human maintenance. Their distress signals had been broadcasting for months, but no rescue was coming. Captain Park Seo-jin patrolled the borders of human space in one of Earth's new advanced warships and monitored the few remaining alien civilizations that had accepted protectorate status under human authority. These species had survived by abandoning all pretense of independence and acknowledging their complete dependence on human protection and support. The surviving aliens lived in carefully managed reservations where human administrators controlled every aspect of their daily lives. Their populations were stable, but their cultures were slowly fading as younger generations grew up knowing they would never have any real authority over their own futures. They existed as living museums of what galactic civilization had looked like before it destroyed itself. Dr. Lee established preservation zones around the homeworlds of 7 extinct species and installed monitoring equipment to record the natural processes that would gradually reclaim their abandoned cities and infrastructure. Future human archaeologists would study these worlds to understand how advanced civilizations could collapse so completely when they lost access to the technology and expertise that had made their prosperity possible. The scientific value of the alien ruins was limited because most of their technology had been based on human innovations that were already well understood by Earth's researchers. The extinct species had contributed very little original knowledge to galactic civilization beyond serving as markets for human goods and destinations for human services. Captain Lee Jae-min returned to the ruins of Station Prime, where the Galactic Council had once met to discuss the affairs of dozens of civilizations. The massive space station was now a dead hulk, slowly falling toward the star it orbited. The Great Chamber, where alien delegates had voted to impose regulatory protocols on humanity, was open to space and filled with frozen corpses. Lee walked through the abandoned council chambers wearing a spacesuit and remembered the day 18 months ago when he had responded to Councillor Velthar's arrogant declaration that humans were useful, but not indispensable. The spider-like alien's body was still sitting in his council seat where he had died when the station's life support failed. His mandibles were frozen in what might have been surprise at the realization of how wrong he had been. The captain made his way to the central podium where High Arbiter Thondul had once presided over council sessions with crystalline dignity. The being's shattered remains were scattered across the floor where an explosion had torn through the chamber when the station's power core finally destabilized. The aliens had never learned to maintain the systems that kept their civilization functioning. Lee activated his personal recorder and delivered humanity's final message to the galaxy. The species that had once dreamed of partnership and cooperation among the stars had learned harsh lessons about the true nature of interstellar politics. Friendship meant nothing when power was at stake, and generosity was seen as weakness by those who received it. The human fleet completed its survey of the galactic ruins and prepared to return home to Earth. Their mission had confirmed what everyone already knew, but the scope of the collapse was still shocking to witness firsthand. An entire galactic civilization had destroyed itself within 2 years simply because its leaders had tried to control the species that made their prosperity possible. Admiral Bayek filed his final report as the fleet entered human space and saw the thriving colonies and advanced infrastructure that had been built during the galaxy's collapse. Earth's territory now extended across hundreds of star systems, as human explorers claimed empty worlds that had once been disputed between alien civilizations. The species that had tried to limit human expansion had inadvertently given humanity room to grow beyond all previous limits. President Moon received the Admiral's report in Earth's new capital city that had been built in orbit around the Moon. The artificial world housed 50 million humans and served as the administrative center for an empire that spanned half the galaxy. The civilization that had once begged to join the galactic community as junior partners now stood alone as the undisputed masters of known space. The president read through detailed accounts of extinct civilizations and dying worlds while human. Children played in parks filled with alien artifacts that had been salvaged from the ruins. The next generation would grow up knowing that their species had once tried to build something beautiful with alien partners, but those partners had chosen fear over friendship and control over cooperation. Earth's final offer to surviving alien species was delivered through automated messages broadcast to every remaining inhabited world in the galaxy. Those who acknowledged human superiority and requested protectorate status would be allowed to continue existing under strict supervision. Their basic needs would be met and their cultures preserved, but they would never again have any real influence over galactic affairs. Species that refused the offer would be left alone to face whatever fate awaited them in a galaxy that had forgotten how to maintain its own infrastructure. Earth would not interfere with their choices, but neither would Earth provide any assistance. When their remaining systems finally failed completely, the broadcast concluded with Captain Lee's words from the ruined council chamber. The aliens had wanted to see what the galaxy looked like without human interference, and Earth had given them exactly that opportunity. Now they knew the answer to that question. Without humans, the galaxy was a collection of dead worlds orbiting dying stars, while the survivors lived as refugees in the ruins of their former glory.